Joined now by TSN Hockey Insider, one half of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast, our Wednesday regular, Mr. Darren Dreger. Have you caught playoff fever yet, Dregs?
No. What I've caught is a lack of sleep, which normally goes hand in hand with the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, we've seen some good games. You know, the wild overtime finishes that we saw Monday night in Game 1. The fact that the Seattle Kraken beat Colorado on night 2, the Toronto Maple Leafs get trounced by the Tampa Bay Lightning, Winnipeg rolls over Vegas. The hockey, I think, has been surprising. For the most part, it's been pretty good, but we've seen some sloppy starts to series in the first 2 nights as well.
Yeah, barely got settled last night before it was 1-0 for the Tampa Bay Lightning in Toronto against the Maple Leafs. Let's get into some Vancouver Canucks news here, Dregs, and we'll move on from there. Darren, Patrick Allvin with a command performance in his year-end season, end-of-season presser. Jim Rutherford chooses not to attend. He's vowing to zip it, and he's keeping that pledge. We know Michael Doyle's running some of the bigger arena projects over at Canucks Sports Entertainment. Are we starting to see the handoff that Rutherford talked about when he first got hired here, about training up a new management team to ultimately take over?
Yeah, Matt, I think the handoff happened several weeks, if not months ago. And really by design, this would have been the focus of Jim Rutherford in coming over. But he also wanted to make sure that he was available and always will be available to Patrick Allvin and the management group of the Vancouver Canucks. Too involved at times? Yeah, I think that Rutherford would admit that. And so when you go back to the media availability where, there was turmoil, there was coaching change, there was everything going on, and he said, look, it's time for him to step away and zip it. That doesn't mean that he's going to be less available to Patrick Allvin and management or anyone associated with hockey operations. But he has to let his general manager do the entire job. And that includes being the main point of contact for the public and for the media. And I think that Patrick Allvin proved the other day that he is more than happy to do that and certainly comfortable in doing that. But I don't think that he has more authority now than he did when Jim Rutherford was more actively involved publicly. I think that there's a high level of trust from ownership and from Jim Rutherford in the abilities of the management team of the Vancouver Canucks, especially with Allvin at the helm.
Yeah, I agree. It looked like that last time. I never got that vibe previously with Patrick Allvin. It seemed to be a struggle to me to watch him do it, and that's why it was such a revelation to me on Monday. He was great. It looked like he was a veteran guy in front of the media, and I didn't see any of that previously, so it's nice that he seems to be a quick learner on the job here.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair too. And sometimes it is difficult when you're working in the shadow. You're doing the work, but you're also in the shadow of a sage veteran in Jim Rutherford, who has multiple media relationships. Many of those, I can tell you, he's toned down. Doesn't mean that those relationships don't exist, but in the best interest of the Vancouver Canucks, you can't have too many voices involved in what the public acknowledgement is and what you want the position of the Vancouver Canucks to be. So that is now the sole responsibility of Patrick Allvin and Rick Tocchet. And Rick Tocchet is really good because he's brutally honest as head coach of the Vancouver Canucks. And maybe Allvin is just getting more comfortable with that environment. But specific to running the department, I don't think that any of this is new or that Patrick Allvin is feeling more comfortable. I think he was comfortable when he initially got the job.
One of the great answers he gave was the tap dance answer on the buyout possibilities for the summer. Didn't say he wanted to. In fact, he sort of showed a reticence to want to do it, but also left open the door a crack that it's not my intention. Ergo, if I need to, I might have to. But what's your gut telling you about ownership's willingness and about the management's willingness to use that option?
Well, it wouldn't be option A for ownership. We know that. How many years has the position of ownership, been talked about as it relates to, dead money or buyouts and all of those things. And I'm not suggesting that the Aquilinis aren't willing to embrace some form of change. I feel, though, guys, that would be last resort in terms of buying out contracts. See what the offseason brings your way. See if there are trade conversations that you had leading up to the trade deadline to move a bigger contract that could be reapplied in trade conversations, at the draft or during the offseason. But I think the reason that Allvin was careful in how he answered that is because he doesn't have the answer today. As bluntly as we can put it, I don't think ownership wants to embrace buyout, but you also have the input of your coach and your coaching staff. If we're talking about JT Miller as a trade option, for a moment, if we look back to all the speculation around Miller leading up to the deadline, was that in the best interest of the hockey club, given, the strides that they made under the guidance of Rick Tocchet? What's Rick Tocchet's view on trading away JT Miller? How is that going to weaken this team depending on what they get back? So I think all of those conversations are fluid and ongoing, and they just haven't gotten to a point yet where they can formalize exactly what they're doing in any regard financially.
Irf Gafara of the fourth period reporting Émilie Castonguay has caught the eye of the Philadelphia Flyers. They have a vacant presidency. We all anticipate Daniel Briere will be the GM and have the interim title dropped. But Philadelphia, this is preliminary stages stuff, Dregs, if I'm not mistaken. Explain, please.
Yeah, it is preliminary. I know that there's a search committee involved. And I talked a little bit about this last week on Insider Trading on TSN. The Flyers have not formally announced Danny Briere will be the long-term general manager. He's still listed as an interim general manager. For me and the sources that I have, that's a formality. Unless there's a sudden change of heart, Danny Briere is the general manager. So yes, what we're talking about here is hiring a president and an overseer, a head of hockey operations. The Flyers have, as I've acknowledged, hired a headhunting firm, a search firm, if you will, and that search firm is conducting interviews. But, based on, who's been brought into the mix, who's been talked to, who is the front runner for that position of president, head of hockey ops, it's wildly premature because I know that process has just started, I would say, in the last week or so.
Rick Tocchet was non-committal when asked about his coaching staff. Will everybody be back? Do you envision any kind of changes afoot with the Canucks coaching staff?
Yeah, you know what? Let's get into that in just a second. But as we're having this conversation, fellas, I did get a text message from a source that I trust because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Émilie Castonguay was linked into the potential fit as president of the Flyers. Correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Well, my sources say, and I hate refuting information, high place sources. I mean, if she has spoken to somebody in that hiring firm or that headhunting firm, that would come as news to some principal players with the Vancouver Canucks, which seems like a significant stretch.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, we speculate on names and we speculate on situations all the time, but specific to that interview, at least one source here says that they don't believe that took place.
All right. On the coaching staff, Mike Yeo was a holdover here. Jason King was a holdover here from Boudreau's staff to, and in some cases from Green staff with Jason King to Boudreau to Tocchet. Do you anticipate any changes on the Canucks bench?
It's hard to say. I wouldn't be surprised if there are changes on the Canucks bench. I think that there's a real closeness and synergy between Adam Foote and Rick Tocchet. I know, given their history, Tocchet and Sergei Gonchar dating back to the Pittsburgh Penguins days, that there'd be a high level of respect there. So I'm hedging a little bit. With both those guys, and I'm now talking about Foote and Gonchar, what was their experience like? What's their family situation like? Is a job of the Vancouver Canucks the best fit for them moving forward? And I don't honestly have an answer to that, but I feel like Rick Tocchet bringing those two guys in, and that would have been done in concert with Patrick Allvin and Jimmy Rutherford. They would have hoped that there would be some term and some longevity. I would feel less comfortable in saying the same of Mike Yeo because he's part of the old regime and the Bruce Boudreau regime. Doesn't mean he's not a good coach. Maybe he wants a change. Maybe he needs something different as well. So I guess I'd be a little surprised if there isn't some tweaking to that bench.